Thanking the organizers for inviting me here to this special event and also wishing Ashutosh a very happy birthday. I don't see him here in the audience. Otherwise, it was a very correct moment to pull his legs, being a very close friend. And many jokes that Ashutosh is very fond of, and I could have told him his friend, but unfortunately I don't see him here, so I will tell you later his own jokes. So thank you very much, and all the best to Ashutosh for the coming years. Wishing him all the very best for next 35 years, as Dr. Mande has said. As the title of the meeting says, Technology, Research, Innovation and Policy, let me begin from the last keyword, policy, and how do policies very deeply affect development of societies and nations. And I want to give examples, a few examples of highlighting each of the keywords before we come back once again to the current geopolitical situation, which Mr. Ram Madhav actually articulated so well. Let me start with policy. So all of you are aware that India was occupied by multiple forces in this history, but the 190 years between 1757 and 1947 was a period which is very fresh in memory. And to make that happen, in a sense, that to enslave Indian population to a rule which is foreign, controlled from a foreign land, a very strong policy was used for that particular purpose. And that was in terms of education. All of you are aware of 1835. The policy was brought in that all education will be necessarily in English, and people will not be taught in the native languages. What used to be taught, for example, the medical education used to be conducted both in Sanskrit and Urdu, and that was taught in 1835. And that actually the education policy, or what very infamously what we call as the Macaulay's policy, brought India really on its knees, and we became slaves for the next number of years. That's a policy that was implemented to enslave Indians. But let me give you a more positive example. In 1947, when the British left us, India's GDP, or the contribution to world GDP, was less than 3%. So India was really a poor nation in 1947. We were coming out of multiple challenges. We had just come out of 1943 famine. And to just give you a feel for numbers to the younger audience here, 1943 famine in Bengal, about 3 to 10 million people died because they did not get food. 3 to 10 million, which is 30 lakhs to 1 crore people, died because they did not get food to eat. That was 1943. So India was coming out of that. And more challenging was, of course, the largest human migration ever witnessed in human history happened in those years. So this is the challenge that we are coming out of it. And India had to have strong policies to put in place to march towards what we are here today. I want to give one particular example, and that example relates to leather. Kanpur is one of the central places for leather technologies and leather centers. And that's the example that I picked up for a policy thing. So at the time of independence in 1947, the entire leather sector in India employed about 25,000 people. मात्र 25,000 लोग leather sector में काम करते थे 1947 में. And 1970, as we were moving towards a major crisis, the balance of payment crisis and so on and so forth, a policy was brought in force. 1970 was raw hides and skins of leather would now be banned from exporting, and the finished leather product that were coming into India, they would be charged a tariff of 25%. Now tariff word is being spoken about much these days. We are going to come back to tariff a little later towards the end of my talk, but that was the situation. Government of India banned export of raw hides and skins, and consequently we had to start making our own leather in India, and we had to evolve our own processes, technological processes. And that's where technology comes in. the chemicals had to be made for processing leather in India. And there's a company called Baman and Lorry, they were actually roped in to make these chemicals. All the technologies were evolved or adopted either, and consequently today, India's leather sector, it employs more than 50 million people. That is from 25,000 to 50 million people. And India's export today is close to about $5 billion leather products. What India did not actually have any export value on leather, and India did not have much manpower working in leather sector, was 1970 leather policy that was written down. It transformed India's leather sector in generating employment and generating enough amount of, at least some amount of foreign cash in that particular respect. And our scientists and technologists, of course, played a pivotal role in this particular aspect. I don't want to go too much into technology. Professor J.P. Doshi has given such a fantastic example of what we saw just now, of bulletproof jackets, that what technology can do of making country self-reliant in some sense. But I want to go to the most talked about example of the showcase example of India's science and technology, and that about green revolution. Now, most of us have talked about green revolution, and we know that green revolution actually made India self-sufficient in food production. But I want to give you a little bit background of what made green revolution possible and some of the untold stories of green revolution. Many of you probably are not aware that in 1965, due to successive years of less rainfall, India was facing similar situation as 1943 famine. Right? So 1965 was the year that successive loss of rain or lack of adequate rainfall, India was facing very similar situation as 1943 famine. And at that time, India made an appeal to different nations to provide food. And not many nations came forward. And at the behest of his wife, the then US President agreed to put in place a program to support food grains in India. The program was called PL 480. Some of you have heard the name PL 480. And as luck would have it, the grains would come from US. They would be stored in the PL 480 godown in Delhi, and then they would be distributed all over the country. And any guess what happened to that PL 480 godown? Anyone has any guess what happened to the PL 480 godown? It is the headquarters of Department of Science and Technology today. The technology bhavan, what you see, is the PL 480 godown that is to exist there. So that's the thing that actually happened. In the meanwhile, C. Subramaniam, who was the agriculture minister, had heard of dwarf wheat variety that was being developed by Norman Borlaug. And therefore, C. Subramaniam decided that this variety of wheat must be brought to India for cultivation. So that was the first step that was taken in the green agriculture revolution. But there were also very fantastic officers in the Prime Minister's office, somebody called Shiv Raman. He, along with C. Subramaniam, together worked out that how we can roll out good agricultural practices in India so that we can actually take steps towards becoming Atmanirbhar in food production. There were two other critical issues that needed to be addressed. Most of agriculture in India was manual based. Right? So farmers and all used to use bullock carts and used to actually plow the fields with their hands. It had to be mechanized. And number two, we had to make our own agri-pesticides. Mechanization of agriculture was not possible because India had a balance of payment crisis. 1965 was a situation which was as bad as 1991. All of you have heard of 1991 because it's fresh in memory. But 1965 was as bad as 1991. The balance of payment crisis. India was importing 3,000 tractors per year from Bulgaria. Only 3,000 tractors India was able to import per year, where there was a requirement for more than 100,000 tractors per year. And that is the time when government appealed that can Indian scientists make tractors in India? And that's the challenge that Indian scientists took up in Ludhiana, in the Central Mechanical Engineering Research Institute. a group of scientists spun off from a laboratory. Speaking of examples, are not too many in India. Even today, there are not too many scientists who are willing to spin off their technologies and make a company out of it. This group of scientists spun off and they started what is called as Punjab Tractors Limited. And what you see today, the Swaraj tractor was rolled out as a consequence of that. And India became now completely self-reliant on tractor production. The same thing with agri-pesticides. Agri-pesticides started being made in National Chemical Laboratory in Pune and in Institute of Chemical Technology in Hyderabad. And India became self-sufficient in making agri-pesticides. So a combination of proper irrigation, the dwarf variety of wheat, Norman Borlaug himself visited India, mechanization and chemicals all together unrolled into what we call as green revolution. And of course there is a champion scientist who would do this, and you don't have to guess the name, is none other than M.S. Swaminathan, who really led the agricultural revolution from the front. So, policy and technology implementations are not new. At any point of time, society faces some sort of crisis, especially our society. Or at any point of time, India faces any kind of social crisis, our scientists and technologists have always risen to the occasion. I have given you only 2 examples, but I have many, many examples that I can go on giving, that our scientists have risen to the challenges of the contemporary issues and solved those challenges gloriously. I just want to give one last example, once again related to agriculture, and it's a very recent example, less than 10 years ago, and you'll be surprised how much difference it has made on farmers' lives. And that example relates to cultivation of rice. So Sona Masuri rice, all of you have heard of Sama Masuri, Sona Masuri, right? That rice is very blight susceptible. So there is a blight actually which affects the rice, and the challenge which was floated that can we make blight resistant variety of this particular Sama Masuri rice. So challenge was taken up by IISER and Center for Cellular and Molecular Biology in Hyderabad together about 15 years ago, and they developed, by simple through hybridization technique, they developed a hybrid variety of this particular rice, and it was shown that it is blight resistant. And about 10 years ago it was implemented in the field, and on today's date, in 10 years, 20 lakh hectare cultivation happens in India using this variety of rice. 20 lakh hectare. There's a fine example of what science and technology can do. So today, farmers are no more worried about blight problem in at least Sona Masuri or Sama Masuri variety of rice. And there are fantastic examples what research and innovation can do for the country. And I've also told you a little bit about policy, what policy can actually do for the country. Multiple levels, the Indian government and policymakers have always risen to the occasion of forming policies and implementing. And one of the best examples in recent memory is how India tackled the COVID-19 pandemic compared to many other countries in the world. I think that remains the crowning glory of Indian science. When COVID-19 struck, January 2020, India did not have any means of having its own PPEs. India did not have any means of taking nasal swabs. India did not have diagnostic kits. We did not have enough capacity to do RT-PCRs. We did not have, of course, any vaccine, and so on and so forth. And the entire scientific community of the country rose up to the occasion and made everything possible in this country big here. Kanpur is still a fine example. IIT Kanpur made a beautiful incubator. Direct incubation type ventilator was made in IIT Kanpur. Can you believe it? And there are many, many examples of this kind. And we only know about vaccine, which is of course a crowning glory of India's fight in COVID. But everything that needed to be done, Indian scientists did on their own in the country. And it was implemented, and you would find it difficult to believe that the number of people died per million. If you take out how many people died per million due to COVID, India has one of the lowest numbers in the world, compared even to the US, Europe, and other countries. The number of people died per million, and that actually tells you India's capacity to fight challenges on its own. These are fantastic examples. These examples, unfortunately, probably are not communicated to the public to the extent that we need to do. But the organization that I am associated with, Vigyan Bharati, we try to actually communicate this kind of issues to public, that what are the achievements of India's scientists and technologists in a sense. And we should all be very proud of those achievements. And the point that I made is that at any point of time in its history, if there was a crisis that was looming around, if there was a challenge that had to be taken up, India's scientific and technology committee has always taken that up gloriously. And there are many examples, there are no exceptions to any of the challenges not being taken up. We have seen how India has eradicated polio. In the 1970s, we have seen how India eradicated smallpox, and so on and so forth. But today, as Ram Madhavji was talking about, is we are witnessing a very peculiar geopolitical situation. Ram Madhavji very correctly pointed out that organizations such as United Nations, IMF and so on, we don't know how long they are going to be relevant. And under this changed geopolitical situation, are we going to remain relevant? Is India going to remain a relevant nation to the world? And it's a very important point that once Mr. Ramdurai made. Mr. Ramdurai is the former CEO and MD of Tata Consultancy Services. He has written a beautiful book called The TCS Story. And what he has said in the book is that there are 4 major civilizations in the world. If you look at last 5,000 years, there are 4 major civilizations that we talk of, out of which only 2 have maintained continuity to present day. And India is one of them. So we have a rich cultural background, we have a rich civilization background, and we have evolved as a society which is deeply embedded in our own what we call as Sanskriti. And therefore, India is one of the 2 nations, other than China, right, who have maintained these traditions, who must lead the world into the future. China is already showing that, how it can do that. We already see emergence of China. Ram Madhavji also actually alluded to this particular fact. But now time has come that we stand up and we also start leading the world based on our rich cultural traditions and based on what we have done over centuries together. And I have no doubt that in the current geopolitical situation, India's scientific and technological community, the technology, research and innovation combined with policy, I have no doubt in my mind that our best time is just around the corner. And we do hope that as we march towards 2047, the normal aspiration or the common aspiration of people of India, of seeing India as a Viksit Bharat, that would be realized. And for that, the responsibilities clearly rise in the younger audience who are present here. To make India Viksit Bharat is actually the responsibility of the students who are sitting in this audience, and we will be still around, some of us will be still around, but you will make us very proud that India indeed becomes a Viksit Bharat nation in 2047. Thank you all very much.